Hey YouTube, welcome back to the channel. On today's episode of Garage Noise, I'm gonna walk you through step by step what it takes to repair the paint on this hood. We're gonna replace the bumper and repaint this entire front end. So we're gonna blend into the fenders. So there's gonna be a lot of information on this video: how to repair chips, how to paint, how to primer, how to blend, how to sand, wet beds, and how to set up your gun. And then we'll show you how to clear coat. And if you want to increase your knowledge and build your skill, start now by subscribing to the channel and clicking that bell. So we're going to start with the hood on this repair, and the first thing we're going to do is remove the Toyota emblem. I'm just going to use my plastic trim removal tool. Get behind that. It's held on by two-way tape, double-sided tape. We're going to remove that from the back side, and then we're going to remove the windshield nozzles and get this prepped out for sanding. So now that we have the emblems removed and the windshield nozzles removed, we're going to address these peeling areas of paint. We don't know exactly why these areas have peeled. It looks like it's some kind of improper preparation, and maybe a stone chip started this and then it just started peeling. What we're going to try and do is we're going to try and feather edge back these chips. So this hard edge of paint here, we're going to sand that back and see if it feathers out smooth. Now, if there's an adhesion problem, it's just going to continue peeling back and we'll never get it to feather edge out. In that case, this hood needs to be stripped. But what we're going to try and do first, since we're not trying to put color on this entire hood, we just want to blend the color in, and we're going to blend into the fenders, but we want to keep the color to the front portion if possible, so we don't have to go out to the edge. But we need to repair these chips. So I'm going to take a DA with some 320 grit on it, and I'm going to start feather edging a spot and see how it goes. So let's do that. So I've got my 320 on my DA. So as you can see here, it feather edged out nicely where I gradually sanded back the paint to create a smooth transition. The only issue is this hood has been painted multiple times. So there's color here, and I'm sure there's primer underneath that center. That's not metal, that's color. Then it was primered, painted, and it could have been painted again over top of that, it looks like. So there's several layers of primer and paint on this hood, because this is a layer of primer and this is a layer of paint. So we have a little issue because this has a low spot in the center here, because it's going to be very hard to feather edge this out because the paint mill is so thick. So what I'm going to opt to do is just put a skim coat of poly putty over top of this, and that'll fix that problem. But what we need to do is we need to go out and sand out the rest of these chips on the front of this hood. So I'm going to do that now, and then we'll move on to the next step. Okay, so I've got this hood all feathered out. It's feathered out nicely, very smooth. There is a dent right there. Now, I did switch over to 180 grit sandpaper because I knew it was feathering out now. So I decided to go with a coarser paper so it would be quicker, okay? Now I'm gonna go over it with 320, and we're gonna put some glaze in some of these areas that have a little bit of a wave so we can block those straight. I also need to remove this adhesive around this where this emblem is, and I'm going to do that with a rubber eraser wheel. That's hard to say. And I'm going to show you what that is. And I just want to remind you that all the links to the products and tools I use will be in the description below if it's anything you're interested in. These eraser wheels are good for removing pinstripes, any adhesive, and it doesn't damage the paints. So now I'm going to use my drill and the rubber eraser wheel to remove the adhesive that held that Toyota emblem on. This eraser wheel will not damage the paint. Okay, so now I've went over this with 180. Now we're gonna put some icing on some of these areas that have some waves in them from all the paint that's on this thing. So we're gonna put a thin coat of icing on it, block it to get it straight, and then we should be ready for primer. Now, I do wanna note here that there are some little chips in here. I did not feather edge those out. What I'm gonna do is use a little bit of icing to fill those, okay? That's why I went over it with 180 so the icing would adhere properly. So there's no problem with adhesion. Okay, now I have a little bit of icing mixed up with some hardener. We're gonna mix this up thoroughly so that it's all one uniform color, and then we're gonna lay a thin coat over these areas that we feather edged. This I'm gonna use a little, there's a dent here, an actual dent, so I'm going to use a little body filler in that area. Okay, so while this body filler dries, we're going to remove this front bumper cover and see what we have underneath. Okay, now we have the front bumper off, so we need to take a look at the new bumper. I already matched this bumper up. It's the same as the old bumper, so this is the correct bumper. That's one thing you want to make sure of. And then the next thing you want to make sure of, you want to see if this bumper is primed from the factory. So what we do is we take a piece of 320 and we just do a little sanding on it. Usually you can tell by eye, but this is just to show you that you can see black paint or primer has come off. So this bumper is primered. So since this has primer on it already, technically we do not have to prime this before we paint. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna sand this down real well with 320, get in all the grooves, make sure it's sanded real well, and then before we paint it, I will use an adhesion promoter with a flex agent in it to keep it from peeling. We're gonna sand this 320. I'm gonna repair those gouges and then we'll move on. So what I'm gonna use is some 320 on this soft interface pad, and that's gonna allow it to flex over the curves of the bumper. Now you may not have that at home, but if you need one of these, the links will be in the description below. You don't have to use that. In fact, you could sand this all by hand. Just use like a scuff pad or something soft and put a piece of sandpaper on it and sand this entire thing by hand. Okay, so now we have this all sanded with 320. I went around with a Scotch-Brite scuff pad and scuffed all the hard to reach areas. I got some sandpaper in there. That's the roughest area to get. So you want to make sure you take the time to get it prepped out properly, because that's going to promote adhesion and keep your paint from peeling off your bumper cover, and that's important. Okay, so now that the body filler is dry, the icing, we're going to go ahead and block this out. I'm going to start with the air file with some 180 on it, and then I'll probably hand block it with some 180 and then step it down to 320. Okay, now that we've got it all blocked out with the 180 and then we blocked over it with the 320, it's nice and straight now. So we're gonna go around, and anywhere where we broke through into bare metal, we're gonna hit with some self-etching primer in an aerosol can, just those areas, and then we'll scuff this. I've already went over it with 320 with a DA just to remove any of the 180 grit scratches. And then we're gonna apply some 2K urethane primer, and that is a high build primer that we can block over this body filler. Okay, so now we have this hood all in primer. The bodywork's straight, the primer's on. We're gonna now block it with some 320 sandpaper on a long block like this. And I'm gonna hook it up to my vacuum and we're gonna block it straight. We're gonna use an X pattern. It's already very straight. We're gonna make sure, because I'm gonna put a guide coat on it, and we're gonna block it in an X pattern, see if there's any high or low areas, and then I'll probably finish it going over it with 600 on the DA. So let's get that done. Okay, so now we have this hood all ready for paint. I went over it with 320, then I went over it with 600 on the DA, and I went over the entire hood with the 600, because what we're gonna do is put color on here and then blend the rest of it. Clear the rest of it. So the color's gonna cover the primer, we're gonna blend into this color, and then we're gonna clear this entire panel. So the next step we need to do is to mask this off and get it ready to put color on. And I'll go over in detail how we're gonna do that and the techniques to use to paint a hood. Okay, so now we have this bumper all ready to paint, but before we do that, I went over it with 600, and now I'm gonna put some sealer and some Bulldog. Bulldog is an adhesion promoter that's gonna help this paint and sealer stick to that bumper cover, so when it flexes, it's not going to peel off or break. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and apply the sealer and Bulldog. It's all mixed together in this cup. I'm going to put a dust coat on first, because I want to make sure there's no reaction between the sealer and this bumper cover. So we're going to dust a coat on, let it dry, and then we can put a little bit of a heavier coat on. Okay, so here's my gun. I'm using the Astro Euro H Pro HE. And remember, this is the fan pattern. That controls how wide that fan pattern is. We're going to turn it almost all the way closed, just so I have a narrow pattern. Let me show you what the pattern's going to look like. And remember, when you narrow it, it puts more pressure at the nozzle, at the tip, so you need to turn your air pressure down. Adjust it accordingly. See how narrow that pattern is? Show you how wide this thing will go. See how wide that is? Can you see it? So I'm going to narrow this down, and then we're going to get in all these little hard to reach areas, and you want to just be careful not to run it in there. I'm going to turn my volume down a little bit as well, because I don't want to pull it up in there. I'm going to widen it up just a little bit. Okay, so now let's spray inside here. So let's talk about techniques in spraying. When you're spraying, it's very important in anytime you're spraying base paint. You want to be parallel with the panel, okay? So this spray pattern is coming out. You want it to be parallel with this panel at all times, even around curves, or if the panel changes, you want to keep that spray pattern parallel with the panel. You want to keep 4 to 5 inches away. You want to overlap 60%, especially on metallics, and keep consistent speed. You don't want to be stopping or pausing in a panel, that's obvious. But if you do those things, keep the spray pattern parallel with the panel, 4 to 5 inches away. Make sure your paint's coming out medium to wet, and then a consistent speed, then you should get a really nice paint base to layer clear on. So let's go ahead and spray this. Okay, so check out the finished product. We have it all together, and look at that. Nice shine, nice gloss. Bumpers repaired nicely. I even buffed out the headlights. But listen up, if you want to increase your knowledge and build your skills, start now by subscribing to the channel and clicking that bell so you don't miss anything. And here's a couple videos that are going to teach you more about auto body repair and primers. We'll see you next time.